relatively new card type in Magic the Gathering, Sagas are among some of the most flavourful cards in the game. With the ability to present narratives on both meta and in-world levels, they possess a greater flexibility to their function than almost any other card type. And with the latest set Kaldheim almost doubling their number, it's time we took a deeper look at these cardboard storytellers. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I am your host, Andy Bam.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today, we're going to be talking about Sagas. Ooh, baby, I love a Saga. I happen to think they might be my favourite permanent type of Magic. I might just put it out there.
Yes, in terms of subtypes, absolutely. I think enchantments equally, of every single deck of EDH that I have, are like the most exciting cards. I'm like, yeah, this cool instant or sorcery effect that happens all the time, every turn. And then obviously with Sagas, it's like, hey, let's put some chapters up in this hizzy. Yeah, fucking great.
They're not universally loved, though. This is something I've noticed, because obviously Sagas are kind of in the zeitgeist at the moment, because they're back in Kaldheim, and they're a big part of Kaldheim. And as we've spoken about in our world building, like, Sagas, this seems to be the place where Sagas were always meant to be, but they just used them sort of years ahead of time for other things. It's a great effect as well. But they're not universally loved. I remember talking to someone the other day on Twitter, and they was like, well, as a function of Sagas, with the chapters and the fact that it comes in, it does a thing, and you have to wait your upkeep, and then it disappears again. Like, to get a fuller like value out of them, you have to be sort of clunky, and you might have to like flicker them or like bring them back from the graveyard or whatever else, whereas opposed to like, say, something like classic, like a Rustic Study or a Mystic Remora, where there might be an upkeep cost on Remora, but they will always do the thing, and they might stay there for like a whole game, whereas Sagas have like a shelf life. And I thought, that's kind of fair, but no,
temporary permanence, right? You know, I guess, considering the fact that they do disappear, like, that is maybe a negative. But all these things you said about how you have to flicker them or do like counter shenanigans, like, that's added utility, right? That's adding facets to the card. It's not just, you play the card, it does a thing. It's like, no, you play the card, you can also do this with it to reset it. You can add counters. That is actually really interesting, because it's much more engaging, especially with like the 4 chapter ones. Like, that gives you so much utility to play up and down the chapters if you want to go that way. Like, I'm trying to think about making a 5-color Saga deck that would use a lot of these, kind of like your Kenrith deck with +1/+1 counters, where it's not doing it in a conventional, Simic, just make everything huge, turn them sideways kind of way, but having added different utility to it. I think it's very cool. And I would think modal enchantments, which is essentially kind of what these are, because they have this chapter effect. I mean, as we're going to get into, I think that's part of what makes these cards so good, and presents them as one of the best like mechanical methods of storytelling in the game. I think that idea, that sequential effect, I think, as much as, yes, you have to wait for it. And also, these players need to be fucking like more patient, right? You've got a permanent that does 3 different things, and you're complaining that you have to wait around for it.
Some of them do.
These millennials, honestly, god damn it.
I know. So today we're going to be talking about Sagas. Nathan's written a very cool outline for this episode. We're going to try and not get too sort of dry with it, but I mean, God, there's like, honestly, there is so much to say about Sagas, and even individual Sagas. Like, we're not going to go through each individual one and break it down, because to be honest, there are better people who have already done that. If you want to check out some great articles, I will link them below. Annelli from the Vorthos cast, we mention him a lot because he is the king of this kind of thing. He, every time a set has Sagas in it, he writes articles on Cool Stuff Inc. There are also other writers that also do this, that kind of break down each card and what's going on in them. But today we're going to be talking about how these function in the game, why we love them so much, why they should be in the game more, and just, for a podcast where we do nothing but talk about how the art and the mechanics are a narrative, this is that embodied on the cardboard. Like, that is exactly what Sagas are. Then we'll run through some of our favourite ones as well, because obviously, why not? But yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm excited. To me, I had a thought the other day that, to me, Sagas are the kind of thing which I wish Planeswalkers did. Because Planeswalkers are kind of this similar thing where you have, different abilities that kind of cascade down and synchronize with each other for the most part. Obviously, with Planeswalkers, you can choose which one you do, and there's a whole different mini game of their loyalty counters versus like what abilities they can do. But a lot of the abilities, especially for some of the better Planeswalkers, are also storytelling moments, right? Like a Liliana card that brings everything back from the graveyard is her doing that spell, or the Chandras from M19. The 3 different Chandras that were her at different stages in her life. Each of the abilities on each of those different Chandras did different things depending on like her kind of development as a Planeswalker and as a Pyromancer. but they're there more functionally than anything else. Whereas I think sagas are, towards the more narrative end of the scale versus planeswalkers.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm
I think
excited.
if you're looking at Planeswalkers, I think like the flipped ones are probably the best example of having that direct
Yes.
story aspect to it. Also, I'm pretty sure you just complimented Chandra in that. You complimented Chandra Planeswalkers in that little bit.
Look, there's a reason she's a really popular commander, and like, hey, like I have my issues with basing the core sets around planeswalkers. I also think there's benefits to it. It's just the M19 core set was a great place to put Chandra and to have like lots of different Chandra cards. Fine, go at it. Then leave her the fuck alone. Don't put her in the next core set with her own board. This is off topic.
Yeah, we got it. I got you back again. It's beautiful. Right, good. Well, yeah, we've got a lot to talk about with Saga, so let's get into it. So contextually, one of the first things I wanted to think about was because I think that this is probably the way that Magic the Gathering in a card function is telling a story. Like, how do we tell stories in the real world? So the four kind of things that I've mainly thought of in terms of like, obviously nowadays stories are rife and you can get like a Kindle and everything. You can have books written on like electronically worded at you. But back in the day, you had things like, like nursery rhymes, fairy tales, like those are like kind of like the Fae kind of ways that we built up our folklore. Obviously we saw this a lot in Eldraine, playing a lot on those kinds of tropes. But then the other side of it, you've got things like war histories, which obviously famously history is always told by the victor, so there is a certain degree of skewing in terms of whether or not those are true accounts of history or not, but it was a good way of explaining events and the big things that had happened and who was fighting. And then we have tapestries, like the Bear Tapestry, things like that. Another one that was interesting that I didn't think about until right at the end was things like hieroglyphics. We talked about like murals in terms of like the Bear Tapestry. There's a lot of reliefs done in Greek and Roman architecture. Again, we'll see that when we move to Theros. But hieroglyphs is a really good example of telling stories in a permanent way that's also visual. It's not just spoken, having to embellish and understand people's language. It's presenting stories in a way that's visual. So no matter what language you speak, even now years later, we don't understand ancient Egyptian. Obviously, there are translations that were made across the years. It's something you can see and visualize, like cave paintings, for example. That's one of your first methods of storytelling, even if it is just, hey, look, that's our village killing a mammoth. Like, that's a story. Like, that's basically Kaldheim in a nutshell of, look at this thing I did. Witness me, I mean, that's Mad Max Fury Road, but
well, there's a reason that those Seb McKinnon artworks in Ikoria for all the mythoses, where it's like mythos of Snapdax, Lithroy, whatever, those were cave paintings, right? They were a bit of art that told the story, and from those we got a lot of context for those apex predators, despite the fact they had zero fucking story actually narrative wise, but we understood a lot from those paintings, like, and whether that was artistic direction or some of Seb McKinnon putting in his own stuff, those mythoses literally were created around those creatures. So yeah, 100%. I could have seen those cave painting artworks being on Sagas.
Yeah, well. I'm just going to say, it seems like maybe a potential missed opportunity when they weren't going to ground the great beasts in the history of the narrative. Then they should have presented it as they had before and after. They should have presented the events of the set on the cards in Sagas when they don't have the time to do so otherwise. So yeah, I think that's probably retrospectively, and again we'll look at this at the end, like something that they maybe could have looked into as a means of storytelling that was missed. Moving into like general fantasy, like a lot of these obviously it depends massively on how far advanced they are in terms of civilization. A lot of the fantasy books that we think about, like they're in the zeitgeist, are things like Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, those kinds of things, where it's like written histories. So I have written down here, like when Gandalf sees Frodo with the ring, and he has to go all the way to Minas Tirith. In the book, he has to get permission from Denethor to get into the annals, because no one commonly knows the history of the land. Like, it's all written in books, and Citadel's fucking miles away. A lot. Even Gandalf, like a wizard of great power, didn't really know the story of the ring. He had to go and find out about it. Like, that's crazy.
He was effectively an angel in Middle Earth, and even he didn't know.
Even he didn't know. Like, it's so bizarre. I mean, I found out that this process also took like 17 years. Like, I need to reread the book because the film doesn't do it quite justice enough, but it does present that idea quite well. Like, even A Song of Ice and Fire, like J.R. Martin's not talking about a book written down. Okay, yes, it is, and the book is eventually titled The Song of Ice and Fire, but think about that Ed Sheeran scene. Like, that's how the stories are told, around campfires, like, you know, with bloody loot or whatever, you know, playing it to your friends. Like, that's kind of how the stories would be presented, and it's not until someone writes them down for the first time that maybe these things will be remembered and looked at going forwards. Like,
you get Ed Sheeran round a campfire to
play exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was just calling him up, see if he's around. We need a history lesson, Ed.
Ed Sheeran is actually, he's like a reincarnation. He's like Doctor Who. There's always been an Ed Sheeran. That's just going around.
Great. He's the storyteller instead of the Doctor. Great, I love it.
Yeah, he's a character that's just in every shared universe. He's what links like Star Wars to Game of Thrones to Lord of the Rings.
Oh god, my head exploded a little bit there. Right, cool. Moving on. So then, if we translate that into like Magic the Gathering, Magic's an interesting thing because obviously each plane has its own like historical journey in terms of like where it is by our real world standards of development and evolution and technological prowess. Like planes like Ravnica and Kaladesh, they're going to have no problem having everyone know everything that always happens. I mean, Kaladesh isn't far away from having little fucking holocasters that you can like hologramly talk to each other through ether, you know? Like Ravnica obviously has annals, it has libraries, it has great swaths of research that obviously Jace would have poured over throughout the sets that he was over Ravnica. So certain settings might not necessarily have the right like position for sagas because the history is very now and it's very modern and the world is very modern. But you look at certain planes, like the ones we're going to talk about, and their histories are much grander, and the civilization isn't as advanced. Like Kaldheim hasn't had a technological revolution or anything. I mean, realistically, because of the way the realms work, they probably won't. I mean, Asgard is a good example in like current real world like reference in terms of like the Marvel universe, in terms of magic, but it's science instead. But if you look at it, they're not actually using like electricity or anything like that. It's all energy shields and stuff, and it looks like they would write with a quill rather than with a biro pen, you know, because obviously that's how fantasy works. But magic's different because certain sets and certain planes can feel very, very hyper. Like look for Phyrexia, for example. I don't think Mirrodin would have any sagas because it's all, I mean, does it in terms of story relevance, do the Phyrexians care about history very much? Probably not. And also it's a metalcrafty kind of plane. It doesn't feel necessarily like it would, you know, have the texture, you know, to want to have like a library written down. I mean, saying that, Clark did write a book, right, about going to the center of Mirrodin.
Well, I think there is also a saga which is we'll get onto because it's one of my flavor picks, which is Phyrexian Scriptures. But when we talk about that one, it becomes Phyrexian Scriptures itself is kind of an odd one because it's not really a recounting of history. It's more like an offering of like a Phyrexian prayer. So yeah, the sagas as cards functionally can do sort of several different things. But yeah, I wonder how they'll be kind of used in the future. But yeah, at the moment, it seems to be predominantly as a recounting of historical events for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's kind of like, you know, putting it into kind of context. In terms of mechanical relevance, like it is one of the better methods of mechanical storytelling I think we see in the game entirely. They show progressive arcs that are understandable. They're demonstrative of events that literally took place within the set, within the world. You know, this isn't just, hey, look, there's a dog over there. Or, oh, look, this is a specific king. Or, oh, okay, this is someone smiting a dragon, you know? Like, no, these are, like, actual real-world events that are kind of, you know, they've affected history, they've affected, like, lineage, you know, that kind of thing. And you get to go on a journey with the cards. Like, little things like Level Up, Figure of Destiny, for example, they have really cool vibes of where you feel the card developing. Like, you know, you're building the character up and there's always a journey that you go on with the card. It's not just, okay, the card does this and it only does this. No, the card starts in this. And by the end of it, you've gone on a little journey. You've had a bit of progress with your card. You know, it tells an individual story within whatever story you're telling within the game, within whatever story you're telling within the set, within the whole world of Magic. It's such a microcosm of storytelling. And I think it's very important to show certain events in this way because otherwise you can't necessarily do them justice.
Yeah, for sure.
So another thing to take into account, and this is like the last point in terms of like why I think these cards are important, is because this is event recognition and presentation, right? These are the things that Wizards have designed to go, this thing happened. This is how it happened. It was important. Pay attention.
Mm.
And I think that's quite important going forwards, because we'll look at the first set, Dominaria, and everything's kind of in retrospect. Going forwards, realistically, there's not many more planes we could go to that has a rich history of thousands of years of lore. So we need to look at how they're going to be presenting like Sagas, you know, how they did it in past sets and how they're going to kind of do it going forward. So I think that is an important thing to go like, look, this is a story we want to tell. We might not have the time to tell it even in web fiction. We might not have the time to create 3 or 4 spotlight cards, which again I don't necessarily think is the right way anyway. So here's the whole story in one card, so you can go on the little journey yourself and investigate by your lonesome, instead of us having to hold your hand all the way through it. So we've had 3 sets that have had sagas. Strangely enough, I only found this out obviously doing the research here, but Kaldheim kind of went a buck the trends. The first time we hit sagas was in Dominaria. We only had 14 of them. Now 14 seemed like quite a lot. Theros we only had 10, and with Kaldheim we got 20. Now that's sorry. I mean, this is a thing in general, right? Like Kaldheim had like 35 different legendary cards. Like I know we said, oh, it feels like there's a lot in the set, and we couldn't really break down exactly why it felt like that. It's things like this, you know. There's 20 new legends, 20 new sagas, 35 new legends. Obviously, modern sets have a bit more of an influx, but with Dominaria we had 14, which I think is probably about the right kind of number. I think it's enough to show enough things without it feeling like you're having to force the cycle, as it were. Like maybe with Kaldheim, when we get to it, there'll be a point of contention on whether or not they should have done 2 10-card cycles. You know, maybe that's a bit too much. Whereas with Dominaria, it's the throwback set, right? Lots of events to go for newer audiences. A lot of shit happened throughout the years, so they're going to explain it a little bit for you, right? If you're a new Vorthosian and you want to learn a little bit about the history of Dominaria, good luck to you. It's going to take you fucking months. But the sagas provide like a really organic way of depicting the events. And as I said, at the time, it was really exciting for everyone because it was a new method of storytelling. It was a new method of the card being presented. Okay, yeah, it's an enchantment, but we haven't ever had an enchantment that had progressive functionality, that did artwork on the side. You know, like this was quite bold, and I think it was a very necessary thing for Dominaria, because as I say, there's a lot of history that you have to catch up with, and this is probably the best way to do it, instead of doing 15 different story articles where they have to go yeah, so this thing happened, or oh, okay, right, this thing happened. If you want to learn more, go and read this book that you won't be able to get hold of. Like, you know, it kind of again creates little microcosms of sets that people who've been playing for like 15-20 years can go, oh, I remember when I played when Ice Age happened. Like, oh, I remember.
It also they also synced up really nicely with a lot of the legendary creatures and also legendary spells that they brought out that did similar things. Like you had like Urza's Ruinous Blast, for example, or Halcyon the Moon, you know, all that kind of stuff. Where, yeah, you're right. They used it as a kind of storytelling device to show these sort of big events. And also, mechanically, like we were saying with Kaldheim, all the mechanics seem to function with each other as well, because it was the historic mechanic, right? So sagas are all artifacts and all legendary spells, be they permanents or otherwise, are considered historic spells. So if someone has a historic trigger, it sort of syncs up with all these different things, which is pretty cool. But yeah, really slick way to tell new stories and old stories from Dominaria for sure.
So the other thing is, this was what I was going to say, like, there are, like, as you say, living descendants like Danither and Wrath. Like, we have the people from these histories. So you see Triumph of Gerard. Okay, it doesn't say Gerard Capuchin. But if you then went to go and look at, okay, who's Gerard? And you go, oh, Gerard Capuchin. Wait, wasn't Danither and Wrath in the current Dominaria set? Oh, okay, so that must be from the same lineage. And it kind of creates this constant. This is the thing that I think why Dominaria landed so well, is because it did a really good job. Not only, you know, did the Don himself, Richard Garfield, help design the set, but it did a great job of tying the new and the old together, which is exactly what at that time I think in Magic really needed, because there were these old school players and then a lot of the new school players, and they needed this kind of set that kind of got the new players excited, it reinvigorated the old players, and it kind of created like a middle ground for everyone to kind of play within. But we also got to see, like, you know, people from the old, like Joyra, Joda, Teferi, not just events but actual characters that still live, that you go, wait, how have they been around for this much time? You go, well, maybe you should go and look that up, you know? As well as having, you know, the like dusting of the content. And again, it's all about context. It's all about giving context to the story. And that's what we really like in sets, specifically talk about you and myself, is that we like it when the cards make organic sense and tell a story, like world build. And it's very difficult to world build a set that's had 10-15,000 years worth of history. And they did a very good job of doing that. Because like some of the events are like the Fall of the Thran, that's set 10,000 years in the past. That's like minus 5,000 AR, which is after the Argivan Reckoning. Current year we're in is about 4,550 ish. in the present. So, you know, you're talking about 10,000 years ago was the fall of the Thran. Time of ice was about 4,000 years ago. And then the mending of Dominaria was only like, say, 50 years ago. And what's really funny is, yes, that was only 50 years ago in terms of like Dominarian years. But the mending for us as players and in general is like, that's still quite a while ago, right? It's like, no.
Yeah.
I was like yesterday for Dominaria, you know?
Yeah, well, yeah, considering that's a that's a big piece of history, like that's closer towards modern day characters in Magic the Gathering than say World War II is for us. And we still like remember World War II as a society very clearly. But when you're playing a game where every set you go to a new world with a new history and you have to, you know, get involved with all new stories, talking about the Mending, which was a story beat that happened like 10, 12 years ago, is, you know, ancient history. So like, and there's so much going on with it as well. Like this is Dominaria had whole novels written about their histories, which, you know, are unreliable at best a lot of the time.
Yeah, right. And I guess like that's what's funny is like kind of each saga kind of did encapsulate like an individual book. Maybe the Rite of Bells and Lock, obviously, because he cheated within the story of making himself, you know, the father of machines and the unholy, like all of the, he gained so many titles that weren't actually his. I think it's quite nice that he got a saga, even though, you know, for all intents and purposes, that's not old news. That happened like last week. You know, you can't just make a saga about yourself. Well, Bells and Lock absolutely can. So even things like that, like it really plays into the flavor. Like a lot of, as you say, a lot of these will be telling the whole story of a book that people won't have time to read. They won't be able to go and get hold of. And it's also little things like the little watermarks you have in the background as well, like the little extra bits that they add to add context of where and how and why these things happened. I think it's also so the interesting thing I think about these is that controversially, I don't think the mechanics are particularly nuanced. I think in terms of card complexity, I think these cards do a much worse job of telling an individual, like specifically nuanced stories, say, compared to Kaldheim or Theros Beyond Death, because I think the abilities, because it was the first time they made them, are just a bit more generic. You know, they're a little more diluted, shall we say. I'm not saying they're not powerful, but I'm saying that the effects themselves aren't particularly complicated. It's a nice, simple effect because it was a new type of card that might take a bit of getting around. You know, they didn't do this with adventure cards. They made adventure cards both complicated in terms of what they do as well as how they do them. So I think this is probably a bit of a concession on their part. They didn't want to make these super complicated cards that have these...
Yeah, I guess they're a bit more just harking to like the general feel of an event or a time and place. Like, I kind of see it. I see what you're going for. There's certainly a lot less clarity for every chapter in the Dominaria sagas than there are for other ones. Yeah.
And it doesn't, like, I mean, when you read them and you look at it, you go, oh, okay, I can probably understand what's happening. So in that regard, the fact that it's a nice, simple mechanic probably plays more to the story anyway, because this idea of the Triumph of Jera, for example, of adding multiple counters on before he finally wins, or, you know, like the Antiquities War, having the two brothers both gain an artifact and then before smashing them against each other. I mean, I'm talk about that in a second with my flavor pick anyway. But yeah, this idea, I think that simple mechanics sometimes present complicated ideas more easily. And I think because these are histories that you need to kind of just have a general feeling of, because a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know about all of the events, that it's kind of better to present it in a simple way than get super complicated. And again, I think moving through the sets, I think they've obviously made sagas more and more complicated. I'm not entirely sure that delivers them quite as succinctly. But again, this is something we'll discuss as we go forward. So I think it's just something I noticed that if you look at the effects, they are a little less, like Fall of the Thran chapter 1, it just says 3 words. You know, if that was in Kaldheim, that would have been filled with like 14 lines of text. You know, just to make sure that it didn't feel like it wasn't doing enough, even though the words "destroy all lands" probably is enough anyway.
Yeah, I've never ever once seen that cast against me in a game of EDH. Put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I saw once. I was like, "Wait, you can loop that?" No, Nathan, put the fake. Don't even go down there. So now the elephant in the room. Can we talk about the art? Because
yes.
Holy fucking shit! The artwork across all of these, I think, is some of the more inspired choices. I think one of the more inspired choices they've made in recent years, as if Dominaria didn't come out like 5 years ago. But you know, it's not 5 years, it was 2018, so 3 years ago. Okay, it was not too bad. It's only 3 years ago. Bad. But yeah, I think it's the first time I think artwork has had a massive diversity across a branded what's the word I'm looking for? Right, cycle. There we go. The branded cycle. So each ending enchantment had, I think it was a great way for artists to kind of stretch their to flex a little bit and go off. What I put down is to really play it the traditional magic art formula. because a lot of these cards
Mm.
don't look like traditional, as in like what we see today. You know, what we talk about, the homogenized kind of fashion of artwork, which I don't think is a problem. But this was a great opportunity for them to do some things that are a bit off the walls.
Yeah, a lot of these artworks, you could imagine the art style for them being something that if the showcases as the art today existed in 2018, a lot of these would be considered as showcase pieces, right? So if you look at something like, say, like Time of Ice, which is like a medieval painting, versus Flame of Keld, which is, you know, a very sort of fancy, realistic version of a furnace door, you know, but it, in a kind of stylized furnace door kind of way. These are the kind of cards that, you know, if we were to do whole cycles of showcase artworks, they might pick one of those art styles. So say every saga would look like on a showcase medieval piece of art, but they chose to kind of, you know, diversify it across the cycle and keep it that way as well for sagas moving forward. It's also worth noting that they're all portrait. So
Yes.
they're all like full art ratio, if that makes sense. Or I guess they're their own ratio because they've got to kind of fit on half of a card as opposed to a full art. So that changes things up for artists as well. And the thing that I think was the real shift for a lot of artists and kind of presented a lot of artists with a different challenge. And I wonder, we'll talk to, maybe in future interviews, if we ever talk to people who've done sagas or a lot of sagas, we can kind of ask them directly. But it seems to me that giving an artist the art direction of, right, you've got this saga, so you need to depict a narrative, but if you're used to doing landscapes or you're used to doing character work or you're used to doing like weaponry, it can't be any of that. It's got to be like a mural or a chiseled out statue or something like that to tell the stories. And you've got kind of flavor beats and Easter eggs and hidden gems that you've got to hit. How do you do it? And it's just really interesting to see how different people have kind of taken that on. Like Triumph of Gerard, for example, is a marble sculpture of Gerard doing his thing, and there's a lot of like little Easter eggs in there with like kind of different shapes and things that are included. But he's very much a figure, so they've still kind of stuck with that, versus something like the Mirari Conjecture, which is like a sci-fi star map. Like, what, you can't get that on anything else. Even on things like enchantments or artifacts, they're still objects or locations, right? Unless they're really abstract. Whereas all of these, yeah, they're all very symbolic, even if they are maybe more realistic in some ways than other sagas are more abstract. They're all symbolic of what they're trying to tell. So yeah, it's a very different thing. It's almost like they created a whole new sort of art direction for magic cards in general.
Yeah,
right?
it almost felt like they deliberately made them, like, obtuse is the wrong word, but as in, deliberately buck the trend of traditional ways of presenting things. Because you've got things like stained glass, tapestries, as you say, like parchment sculpture. Like, these aren't normally things, you don't tend to do a painting of a sculpture very often. I mean, obviously we have like the artifact and Theros. Like, they do it, but it's not something that's traditionally, you're not doing a picture of a picture typically, are you? Whereas this is almost showing a picture of how the in-world's characters are presenting the stories, not us seeing the artist give us a window into Theros. It's like, no, give us a window of Theros' window of itself. God, worse.
Yeah, and that's that step removed of like meta narrative, I think is really pivotal in this being something that's been so well received across all the different sets that I've had sagas in. You're right, it's not a picture of the event. Like if you have a creature who's, say, like fighting something, or like you have like a warrior creature card, the frame is the snapshot of that warrior in the moment of them doing that thing. So you are the audience member or the person on the battlefield, depending on how they frame it, looking at that event happening in front of you. Whereas these are you as an audience member looking at the depiction of an artist depicting something else. And it's just like that extra thing. It's like you're seeing it in a museum, but this is also a museum piece of something that's happened in world. Yeah, it's just it's so effective in that way. And also you can, like, there are other cards in Magic that do this. If you look at something like Khan's Scion of Urza, right, which is a Planeswalker card where it's got Khan on it, there's lots of little Easter eggs in that artwork where he's looking at like a globe of Dominaria and there's a stained glass window in the background which has Urza. And these little signifiers like are things which people lap up and go, oh yeah, check that out, and this means this and this signifies that and all this kind of thing. So to have a whole card type, regardless of what set it's in, that is just that framing, is just, it's genius. It's really cool.
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting tangent to think that the showcase artworks for Nahiri and Jace and Nissa, they're Planeswalkers from Zendikar, they tried to do this idea of, they tried to use this method of storytelling in a different format. And again, the only grumble I have is that why cover up half of the artwork if the half of the artwork is trying to tell a story. But I think that's
Yeah.
also demonstrative of how this effect doesn't always work on cards. Like, it doesn't work on everything. If it's done right, it's perfect. If it's not done well, it kind of falls a little flat, and then it doesn't necessarily carry,
The art style didn't land with a lot of people with those ones
No.
either, has to be said.
Exactly.
I liked them.
Yeah, I mean, there is something to be said about the fact when these first came out, I don't remember there being any real pushback beyond, oh my god, what is this, and how does it, like, there was that initial not aversion, but that kind of that moment you have to take a step back and kind of appreciate, do I like this? This is new. I don't know how I feel about this yet. But I think most people very quickly lapped it up quite quickly. I mean, the amount of I'm going to start talking about individual highlights as it works. I think we've both got two that we want to talk about. And for example, mine's Time of Ice is my first one, and the amount of detail and the different bits and pieces you get fitted into. There are so many Easter eggs in this tapestry. That, and not only do I like the fact that it's not a traditional, again, that it's a painting of a tapestry. Someone's. You could have got the artist to maybe do a tapestry themselves. That might be something they end up doing going forwards. But this isn't the first time we've seen a tapestry in. But the fact that it tells a whole story. There's an article about Time of Ice specifically, like it's the card of the day or card of the week or whatever in back in 2018. So go and have a look at that if you want to. But it shows all of the characters that are involved in it. It has little hints of Maritlage. It has everything that I want in a card. It tells a story at face value, but then also there's more to investigate as you get into it. And it's not a very complicated effect. Both of my picks aren't, I mean, this specifically isn't a pick because of what it does. It's more of a pick because of how it looks and how the story is presented. I think Franz Wolfwinkel's done a fantastic job. And again, it's top down, like this vertical aspect ratio is really interesting because you do read it going down more. And so you kind of, when you have a square picture, like a normal artwork, your eyes can go to various different places. I mean, obviously the artist will try and pull you into a certain focus, but with these, your eyes very much focus from the top to the bottom and tell the story as they go, which is a very good way for artists to kind of play around with that. I think with certain sagas they've done this very well. In certain sagas they didn't necessarily go for it. Like I think Triumph Jara is a good example of where they might have ignored the need to read down the card as you're going, because as you're reading down the card of the text, your eyes are naturally following this. And we'll talk about this in a second with your example. But I think that I'd say that vertical aspect ratio is very, very clever, and this is one of the times I think it's done very well in Time of Ice.
Yeah, for sure. One of my flavor picks for the Dominarian sagas has to be the Mending of Dominaria. It's one of two that I've picked out. It's the Mending of Dominaria, which I guess I'll read it out. Is 3 green. The first 2 chapters are the same, so it's mill 2 cards, and you may return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then the third chapter is return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield, then shuffle your graveyard into your library. And the artwork is a Jamuran, which is, I mean, when we're talking about the Dominaria sagas, there's just no way to talk about everything that's referenced in these sagas because it's just bonkers. Because it was half the game's history of storyline was just based on this fucking plane. Yeah. Jamura is one of the main continents on Dominaria. So it's a Jamuran carving, which is being carved out of a tree. So it's like a whole tree's been carved out. And from the bottom up, it shows Dominaria, a fractured Dominaria, so all the continents are all fractured out, which flows into a carving of Teferi. So it's a little tiny depiction of Teferi. And then going up the more natural spiral of the tree, we have 3 busts carved out of Khan, Lord Windgrace, and Freyalise. And the whole depicting of it depicts the event of the Mending on Dominaria. The thing that's really interesting about this saga, and the one I picked it, isn't really to do with the abilities. The abilities, as we said, with Dominarian sagas, is a bit more generic. It's a bit more abstract. So the whole idea of the Mending was the event that kind of finished off the old lore of magic and led into the new sort of modern lore of magic. So it was kind of the end of the Dominaria-centric stories and then starting to kind of bleed out into the multiverse. And specifically changing planeswalkers from being like gods into being sort of more like just plain hopping mages. And what's really interesting about this piece is what we were saying about how these aren't literal depictions of events. They're depictions of people from the plane depicting those events. Teferi, as we all know, wasn't necessarily a villain outright of the Dominaria sort of saga and the Mending. He was kind of plagued by hubris, and he phased Zalfir and Shiv out and could only get Shiv back. So people blame him for Zalfir disappearing, which is kind of correct, but also kind of not. there's a lot more nuance to it than just Teferi is a bad man, right? And especially now, we see Teferi as being a hero of Dominaria. So his inclusion at the bottom of this pile of planeswalkers is very indicative of how people think that he is somewhat responsible. He's, overshadowed by the busts of the other three planeswalkers. His cape flows into the broken planet of Dominaria, so people hold him responsible, but he's still important enough to be in this bust. And then the three busts of the planeswalkers, Khan, Windgrace, and Freyalise. These are three, in the eyes of the Jamuran people, these are three heroic planeswalker figures who were able to shut up a lot of the time rifts that the mending was kind of built around. Again, so much going on in the mending. Basically, time rifts are ripping Dominaria apart. Planeswalkers use their sparks or the sparks of others to close up a bunch of time rifts to save Dominaria, and it kind of resets the multiverse in this structure. So Freyalise, Lord Windgrace, and Khan are seen by the Jamuran people as being very heroic, so they're depicted in this bust. But there's also notable exceptions. Jeska is a notable exception. Nicol Bolas is a notable exception of planeswalkers who did close up time rifts and were essentially heroes. But because of their actions during the mending, because of the fact that this is a Jamuran bust versus someone who is like maybe from the Tolarian Academy or whatever, these people are seen as undesirable, and so they're not included in this kind of reference to heroes. And that's the reason I love it. We as audience members who know enough of the story, or even kind of know a lot about the story, depending on how much you're up on Dominarian history, know how the mending went down from like an objective perspective. But this is a subjective version of events, which is why I love it. And I think, it adds enough flavor that people will go, oh, cool, that's Lord Windgrace. I've seen him in a Commander precon. Oh, I know that's Khan. I know that's Freyalise. Oh, why is Teferi like a whole figure, but he's tiny? But then when you actually dig deeper into it, there's like a lot more nuance going on. And I love it. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, in my head canon, Jeska was on the other side of it, because it's a 360 sculpture, so like I added it. Oh no,
sure. I think this one's had a lot of written about it by people like Jay Annelli, or Kelly Diggs did a quite an in-depth Twitter thread about it. And I think Jeska is actually omitted completely because under the influence of Leshrac, she is responsible for using a lot of other Planeswalker sparks to close up time rifts, as well as her own eventually. And the people of Jamura don't see her as a heroic figure, despite the fact that she is pretty instrumental in achieving the mending. But, to the people of Jamura, she's
all
not
about
so good.
perspective, isn't it, right? And that's the thing. History is, as we said earlier, very subjective on who it was that won it, who is around to tell the tale, and how they perceive the events. If histories were written by differently in 1,000 years' time, who would ever be able to turn around and say they were wrong? Because you don't know, realistically. So my second pick is a little bit more focused on like mechanics, telling the story better, and that's the Antiquities War. Not only is the Antiquities War for me my favorite kind of arc in Magic, I love the Urza versus Mishra and all the nonsense. I mean, I'd done a whole Tron Lands kind of video about the beginnings of the Brothers' War, and I like the fact that they do call it the Antiquities War instead of the Brothers' War. Because again, it's a matter of nuance of what the subjective opinion of the war is, and I prefer that to have the non personal aspect to it. Like it makes it feel a little bit more, I think, legitimate. This feels like something that would have been taught in school. And so the Antiquities War is 3 and a blue for enchantment. Same with the mending. The first 2 chapters have the same ability. You look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them, put it into your hand, put the rest on your bottom in a random order. And the idea of this is how both brothers are delving, getting resources. They're plundering they're mining the earth out for resources, creating these constructs, these war machines to fight against each other. But there's lots of, throughout the early years of history, early years of Magic, a lot of the cards in the sets were like these war machines based on Thran blueprints for Urza, and then a lot of the Phyrexian influence for Mishra. And then the third chapter, artifacts you control become base power and toughness 5/5 until end of turn. I like this idea of they're both researching lyrics, gaining weapons of great power, and then amassing them, animating them, and then just throwing them at each other. Because that's essentially what this card does. I've played it in Braille for a few years now. Where you go, you search, you play a signet out, you search, you get your Darksteel Citadel down, and then suddenly everything's a 5/5, and you swing the entire army at someone. Like, I love this idea. This you don't get to see it depicted. It's again, things like Urza's Ruinous Blast and Kamal's Druidic Vow and things like that. Getting to see actual events from times that I didn't get to play in, and also times that weren't necessarily depicted on the cards quite explicitly. This is a great representation of it. The artwork does a great example of showing the moment where they split the Power Stone and cause a great chaotic explosion. Like, it shows Khan in the bottom left. Maybe it's Khan, maybe it's just one of the other silver golems that Urza created. Khan wasn't the only one. And then you can see one of the dragon engines on the right hand side at the bottom as well. Like, it's got so many little hints of the history. And again, it's something that by itself tells a lot. But if you want to dig deeper into it, it gives you hints at the history that's behind it, as well as telling the story more succinctly. I think a lot of the Dominarian sagas did. I think this is a great representation, and I think the artwork backs it up as well. Mark Teddin doing a great not tapestry, like parchment kind of like artwork.
It's kind of like how you would see sort of like Da Vinci's spiral copter would be like on parchment and kind of ink drawings, rather than blueprints. It's like early blueprints, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And it kind of also harkens back, probably deliberately, back to artwork from early days of Magic. Obviously, this is the Antiquities War that was represented in sets back in the day, and we're getting to see that kind of style of artwork reinvigorated and put back into the modern era. So I think that, again, I just really like the Antiquities more. There was no way I wasn't going to put this as one of my flavor picks.
Yeah, you want to talk about 90s Magic, you get Mark Teddin involved. I think that's generally the rule of thumb, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
My next flavor pick is one that we mentioned earlier. It's a bit of an outlier, really. It kind of doesn't follow the rules of anything that we've said about sagas, and that's Phyrexian Scriptures. So it's 2 black. First chapter is put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature becomes an artifact in addition to its other types. Chapter 2, destroy all non-artifact creatures, and Chapter 3, exile all cards from all opponents' graveyards. And the Joseph Meehan artwork is literally a Phyrexian altar with blood running down it. You've got a hand draped over the top. You've got a little mask of Yawgmoth inlaid into the thing and lots of blood running down. And you've got etched Phyrexian script in the metal of the altar. And this one has got, actually, it's really deep sort of meanings behind this one. I actually kind of think, as far as sagas go, it does quite a good job at telling the story in a broad strokes of what the Phyrexians do. So the put a +1/+1 counter on something, it becomes an artifact, is the compilation process where they try and improve flesh through turning them into metal. So that's fairly on the nose. You've got Chapter 2, destroy all non-artifact creatures. That's what the Phyrexians do. They destroy all the flesh. They want everyone to be like them. And then Chapter 3 is a bit of a murky one. Some people have read it as it's the Phyrexians kind of destroying the old histories of the planes they invade, which is kind of cool. Like, they're getting rid of all the old stuff. I first read it as, and I think I still do, as the fact that the Phyrexians don't like have any wasted flesh. Like, they reuse the dead, and they'll have like their nulls and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of like that idea. Yeah. So there are no graveyards in Phyrexia. It's just everything's dead, but they're all living. It's like all living flesh kind of thing. The artwork is, and the name of the saga, which, like, sagas' names tend to have kind of significance as well, is a reference to the Urza's Saga printing of Dark Ritual, which has Tom Fleming artwork, which shows a very similar thing. It looks like a goblin's hand or like a null's hand hanging over a Phyrexian altar with a mask of Yawgmoth etched into the altar. So it's kind of direct artistic reference to that. But also the flavor text on Dark Ritual, as well as Bog Raiders, Lurking Evil, Sanguine Guard, and Unworthy Dead, all from Urza's Saga, all have flavor text, which are the Phyrexian scriptures. And it's kind of how we were saying before about how sagas kind of depict something in history or tell a story. Phyrexian scriptures changed it up because it's more of a prayer to Yawgmoth. The Phyrexian scriptures are like the holy book of the Phyrexians, right? So it's got all those kind of connections going on. The Phyrexian script etched in the altar on the Saga Phyrexian scriptures, most people have taken it to be the flavor text from Dark Ritual, so you can literally translate it, which is kind of cool. And they even took it further in Phyrexian Altar. The Double Masters printing for Phyrexian Altar also has another lot of Phyrexian scriptures flavor text, so it's clearly something they want to kind of continue doing. But yeah, I just think just just as a whole piece, it doesn't act the same way as other sagas do, because also it's not a depiction of an event, it's an object that you would find maybe in like a Phyrexian church or something. But I kind of like it. I think it's cool. It does everything that you need to do. It was kind of a nice artistic switch up as well from a lot of the other sagas, like this and Chain of Torment, compared to all the others, was very sort of dark and horror-y, which I think is kind of cool. And like the big, as you say, the big Phyrexian watermark in the background of the text column, because I guess it's not a text box, is it? It's a text column on the left. Yeah, just kind of ties it all together. Like it's just like this is a perfect example of accessible story at point of entry versus sort of deeper lore. Like I think Phyrexian scriptures really syncs it up. If you only had a passing knowledge of who the Phyrexians were, you would get exactly what they are about from this card, right? Including some kind of cool stylistic aesthetic things like the Phyrexian script and the Mask of Yawgmoth and all that kind of thing. But if you dig into it, or if you research it, or if you already know, there's a whole bunch of nuance from other sets and from flavor texts and sets moving forward after this one as well. So yeah. Phyrexian scripture is pretty cool. I wish I had more homes for it in EDH. It used to be my Gliss of the Traitor deck, but I don't play that deck anymore. I just haven't found another home for it.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I don't have a lot of black artifact decks. So I think one of the things also I like about Phyrexian scriptures is, as you say, if it's like you're reading like the prayers and the words of your Yawgmoth's clergy, as it were. I like the idea of, as you read down, the picture itself gets deeper, and it's got more red, more blood going down. It's like the further you get into the scriptures, the more bloodshed that there will be. Like that's really quite nice. It does feel the deeper you read down the card, like the more dark and sinister the card gets as well. So again, this is that vertical aspect really being played up to its fullest. So that was Dominaria. First outing, not bad, Wizards. You did a good job.
Not bad.
Let's have a look at your second outing. We go now. I think it's like 5 years. I think we ended up waiting before we end up getting Sagas again. And I think this was probably a good idea in terms of waiting for Theros Beyond Death to kind of really drive this mechanic home, because Dominarias were one of the first sets that we had that had history going back for years and generations, thousands and millennia of years. Like fair enough, there's a lot of stories still to tell. Not a lot of the other sets will have that same opportunity. We haven't been to a lot of sets multiple times. We haven't been to a lot of sets enough times for it to feel like it's got proper history to it. But I think Theros especially is a really good example of using real world kind of expectation and placing sagas in the set, because things like the Iliad, the Odyssey are great fantastic sagas written in our real world about ancient Greek and ancient Roman civilizations and their versions of like folklore, like Theseus and the Minotaur, stuff like that. For me, it was Jason the Argonauts when I was growing up. Like that was one of the ones that I watched and I was like, man, what is this crazy nonsense? And then I studied Latin also in secondary school, so I got a lot of context to a lot of the stories, but like Greek, I know, right? But like Greek tragedies are like their grand stories. Like it feels a little bit more towards the Kaldheim side of like these are great battles. Like the original Theros pre-release gimmick, and this was before Dominaria. The original Theros block came out. You had hero cards in the pre-release, like that. You either you had hero equipments and you had heroes themselves. It was like you were playing with a little bit of history. That you had this specific hero that did this specific thing. The problem is they were a bit nebulous. They didn't have direct context to the set. It wasn't Elspeth specifically or King Brimaz or someone like that. It wasn't someone that was relevant within the story that we're telling in the set. So they felt distracting, and no one wants too many gimmicks at a pre-release. It's already complicated enough reading the new cards and being distracted by all the new stuff, and yay, foils, so maybe that wasn't the right way to do it. Now we're several years after the first introduction of Sagas, maybe they have another look at it and see how they can integrate it, because I don't think they added that hero quality that it was supposed to add. I just air quoted for the first time in a while. Yeah, that was air quotes there. The hero quality that they meant to. But I think that Theros probably is one of the most natural places for Sagas to fit. Right? They're already you already present kind of the plane as this place of heroic journeys and feats. Again, maybe there's some natural affiliation with that in our minds, because we already kind of synonymize Roman culture with like Hercules and beating the Hydra and the lion and all of the different, again, big stories that we had growing up. So I think this is probably a really good place to have them, because it does feel natural. It feels like they're not having to, it feels like the world itself would tell these stories, right? That's what kind of thing.
Yeah, so like Greek and Roman culture, like versus say more Western Judeo-Christian cultures of right around the sort of same era. like the stories that they would tell and the kind of the histories directly related to like their pantheon of gods, but it was also something that they included in the artwork of like their household items and things like that. So like their pottery would have depictions of stories or of like, you know, warriors or whatever else, whereas things like in Christian churches or whatever else, you might have, say, like a crucifix in your home or a depiction of a saint or something, but then all the artwork and all of the stained glass windows were all very much the preserve of the churches or the cathedrals, which you would go to learn about those stories. Whereas in cultures like in Greece and Rome with these kinds of mythologies, it was very much built into just like the general aesthetic of what everyone was doing, you know, at the time, like on like their like military shields and all this kind of stuff as well. So yeah, it feels a lot more immediate. It's also kind of interesting with Theros, and it went into Kaldheim as well, that a lot of the sagas aren't lost, forgotten histories, because the histories of those planes, even if they are quite old, they're a lot more immediate in how they're like referenced. So in Theros especially, the memory of the people when it comes to what gods were what at whatever time is very short, it's very shallow. Like there's a story where Krufix says that if Xenagos was allowed to keep being the god of revels, even people who were alive before he became the god of revels would probably at one point forget that he wasn't ever not the god. Like he's always been the god of revels. Heliod hasn't always been god of the sun on Theros, but everyone on Theros just accepts that he's always been the god of the sun because that's how it affects their lives now. So a lot of these sagas, even if they are depicting things that happened years and years ago, they're generally told from the perspective of, well, no, this relates to me now, as opposed to, say, the Mending of Dominaria, where even though it was 60 years ago for the people of Dominaria, it's still seen as this kind of reverent event that happened way back. Or like the Antiquities War, modern Dominarians wouldn't have a direct reference for what that meant to them, or the fall of the Thran or whatever. So yeah, it's a very sort of different kettle of fish, and I think it works really well for Theros in general.
Yeah, I think it's naturally, as you say, like the events that are depicted are more recent. They're events that are even happening within the set. You know, like Elspeth's Nightmare, for example, is something that's happening within the set itself. And it's even like, say, Cura Best the Sea God. Like, that was only at the end of last Theros, which in terms of time span is probably maybe at most a couple of years, like realistically. So it's interesting that, as you say, like these are already embedded in the history of the plane. We're seeing, because this is quite big and quite bold, so like it's almost like we're actively seeing the history in the making, right? These current events will live on as epic stories told for generations, right? And we're experiencing them with the people. And it's funny because we get this feeling of reverence with Elspeth's storyline in the first Theros. Obviously, we don't get a saga of her beating Xenagos because Helod's a little dick, you know, and pulled the rug out from underneath everything, which is kind of a shame because we said we get, like, say, Cura Bessa Seagull, which is very cool, a big event, but it would have been quite interesting to see. I mean, maybe we've already seen that story. Do we need to get a saga of a story we've already seen? Well, yeah, why not? Let's see how the plane responds, and maybe the fact we had it omitted, didn't get one, speaks more, because obviously it's not until the end of the Theros Beyond Death story that she ends up besting Heliod in the end anyway. So it kind of, it's that almost like meta-narrative of what is the relevance of the story to the people of Theros, and it doesn't feel out of place and out of context to bring sagas to, like, the immediate time frame, instead of, as you say, having long lost histories, like things like the Antiquities War. It might have been forgotten, and the only reason that people remember it is because of that bit of parchment that has it all written on, and then you go and you learn about it. Whereas this is stuff, as you say, that is happening kind of very recently, or is happening actively right now. I think this is where we start to see a change, though. Mechanically, I think we start to see a bit more of a focus on trying to explain specifically in each chapter the story progression. You know, this is the story we want to tell. These are the 3 points. This happens, then this happens, then this happens. How do we show each individual thing on the cards? I think this is better for sagas, because I think it shows like a mechanical progression. It shows you an arc. It's not just, cool, I get a knight. Okay, I guess I get another knight. Okay, cool, the knight's got buff. You know, instead it's things like... I don't want to say any specifics. I don't know what your flavor picks are. So I'm going to say, screw it. I'm going to say my flavor pick. So Birth of Meletis, for example, shows a specific progression. You know, like you search your library for a basic plains card. That's the initial chapter. That's you finding the land to build the city on. Then the second chapter, create a 0/4 colorless wall artifact creature token with defender. You're building your city. You know, you're founding your civilization. And then third chapter, you gain 2 life. You're prospering. Now the reason I've put it as my favorite pick is that's a succinct story. Each individual chapter is adding to that story and is showing. And yeah, okay, it's not the most powerful card. I mean, tell that to Mono Black Magic who plays it in every deck, because, you know, it's a great stall card. But realistically, it's not doing anything amazing. It's just getting you a basic plains, making a defender, and gain you 2 life. crappy white card, right? No, it tells a whole story amazingly. Weirdly enough, this is one of the ones that doesn't have artwork that shows that as much. This is more representative. Like the birth of Miletus is something people talk about. They don't need to write it down or show people building a building. Great, cool. People building houses, that's a great bit of artwork, right? But what it does show is it shows this idea, this representation that it's Athara pouring the city almost, or pouring the foundations of the city out of her ewer, out of her, the big urn that she carries. I think that's a really good idea, and a way of making sagas that aren't super old in their history relevant and actively like more engaging, because you're seeing the story as it goes along. It's telling 3 specific chapters. I'll be interested to see what your picks are before we go into that in any more detail, because I don't want to say anything, tread over any ground.
I'm just looking at them now, man. Like, I'm looking at the Therosian sagas, and do you know what? I just really like them. They really nailed it with some of these, and it is that progressive storytelling thing that you're saying. Like, this wasn't one of my flavor picks, but I'm going to talk about it. It's the Akroan War.
Okay, good. Right, so, yeah, fantastic. Yeah,
3 in a red, and it's chapter 1: gain control of target creature for as long as the Akroan War remains on the battlefield. Chapter 2: until your next turn, creatures your opponents control attack each turn if able. And then chapter 3: each tapped creature deals damage to itself equal to its power. So the Akroan War is the MTG equivalent of the Trojan War, and like Helen of Troy and all that myth, right? And it is just that story. So you have, the two warring nations, the sort of, prominent female like figure from one nation gets taken by the other one. They go to war over it. It's a whole kind of, love versus war, simps. Romeo and Juliet thing. Yeah. And eventually the war is futile, and it's sort of about like the kind of the hubris and the kind of triviality of war over something like this. And but the artwork tells this story. So it's got the 3, it should have 4 panels. It has 3, and it's the the initial portrayal, the sending people to war, and then the battle itself. And then alongside the 3rd chapter text box, where it says each tapped creature deals damage to itself equal to its power, which is the part of the text box that shows the self-defeating nature of war, and the fact that there are no winners really when it comes to violent conflict. Like, you might get a bit of land, but everyone's fucking dead.
Yeah, right.
The tapestry, which the artwork is, it's being done on like a loom type thing. I don't know quite what the Greek equivalent of a loom is, but it's like a woven tapestry. Yeah, the artwork isn't finished. Like the in-world artwork isn't finished. Instead, it's the bottom of the tapestry that has the loom still attached to the thread of the handle of the loom, because whoever it was, like, you can interpret it different ways. Perhaps that person got killed in the war. Perhaps that person doesn't want to finish the story. Perhaps that person, went off to war themselves and couldn't finish the story because they're currently fighting. And it's that kind of top down, from the top of the card to the bottom of the card, as you're saying, telling that story to the point where the artwork itself stops, because that's what the meta narrative desires.
So good. It's the pinnacle of top-down design, right? I know it's such a pun to say, but it is the pinnacle of top-down design.
Literally top-down design. I mean, my other flavor picks were going to be things like Curobest the Sea God, where it tells a very cool on-the-card story of that, web fiction. We got a web fiction for it. We got Curobest the Sea God as a story, and you can see those story beats on the card. And it's like a C map which shows Kiora and Thassa and all that kind of thing. Another flavor pick I was going to do, I mean, Birth of Miletus I really like as well. I'm glad you picked that. The other one was going to be like the first Rowan Games, which is the story of the Olympics, essentially, the Rowan Games of the Olympics. And it's, your athlete trains, they get bigger and buffer, they win their event, and then they get a gold token.
They get a medal.
They get a medal. The gold token in Theros is literally a medal, so which is kind of cool. And the artwork is... The artwork is pottery. It's what we were saying about how the artwork and the histories of these places were integrated into people's kind of day-to-day objects, So yeah, I don't know. There isn't one flavor pick for me for Theros. Like, as much as the set lacked so much direct narrative for like beginning, middle, and end storytelling, the flavor and the world-building narrative of Theros was really spot on with the sagas.
Yeah. I think the only one that fall flat for me was Timoret Calls the Dead, and I think it's just because the effects itself. I don't know exactly specifically the events it's depicting, and also it's showing like a statue. It's like, does a statue say the whole story? Isn't that just like the final product of the story? That's the only one I think. I think
the statue. Well, Timoret, the one with the Timoret saga is that the statue is made up of all the masks of all the zombies from the necropolises on Theros. So the zombies on Theros are a bit more active and living than they are on other planes. They're not shambling undead. They're kind of like soulless, remorseful beings, but they
Don't
were
mind
the
me,
god
I just don't know who I am. Just doing my daily
Yeah,
job.
they still have societies. Like they have literal cities where this
Yeah.
statue's in. And I think the problem with that is that Timorat is a character, and the zombies on Theros in general, which I think is a crying shame because they're some of the most interesting depictions of zombies we've had in Magic. Period. I love the way that they depict zombies on Theros, but that's so underrepresented
Mm.
compared to everything else that we know on Theros when it comes to direct, like, who was Timorat. Whereas things like the Aroan games and the Akroan War, because they have real world analogues that we can kind of pull from and reference, you don't need that narrative within the stories of
Right.
the plane.
Yeah.
Because we already know what's going on.
Exactly.
So yeah, Timorat it falls flat because we don't have enough meat to go on.
Yeah. And it doesn't do the
but yeah.
same thing as, say, like Elspeth's Night, where it kind of gives you like all the different depictions. Elspeth Conquers Death, for example, having Erebos and Ashiok in the bottom. So you're like, oh, okay, so it had something to do with. Oh, and then there's what's the three-headed dog? Kuranos, right? Is it Kuranos? I think it's Kuranos. There's I know there's Keranos and Kuranos on the plane, whatever. But, you know, it's sort of things like that where you go, oh, so who are these characters within it? Even things like Medomai's Prophecy, kind of, even that's one event, but the mechanics show kind of this progression of how knowledge is gained and all of that nonsense. So, yeah, I think beyond that one card, I think Theros does a really good job of marrying storytelling with the mechanics as well as you say, the meta-narrative within the game as well. This idea of like the Binding of the Titans, like someone finding this tomb or finding this temple after years of going, wait, so Xenagos wasn't always, because who's this lass? And, you know, and then suddenly she's remembered and Clothis is back in the Pantheon again. Like, I love that idea for things like the Binding of the Titans. So yeah, I think very, very well done for Dominaria. For Theros Beyond Death. As you say, it's probably the best storytelling that the set got. So we're quite lucky.
Yeah, it was the only storytelling that the set got.
Yeah, right.
Even the story spotlight cards in that set did fuck all.
Don't. Well, this is something I want to talk about going forward. So I'm glad you brought it up because I think those two things should be more closely tied together. But let's first do the final strike, the third and final time we've seen Sagas thus far, and obviously it's the very immediate pass we're looking at, and that's not even past. It's technically not even released yet. Got Kaldheim, and
yeah.
the two 10-card cycles of Sagas, and basically what it is each realm gets its own rare saga and its own uncommon saga. So this is one thing I really like is that the movement we're going is that we have Theros, which is a plane we've been to once before. Dominaria is a plane we've been to countless times, right? How do you create sagas from a plane we're only seeing for the first time now? Like, is it going to be possible to give us history that we don't know about and present it in a way that feels organic? And the answer, realistically, is yeah, 100%, doesn't matter. Specifically because Kaldheim, we're in a set that's fully immersed in a plane that chants and brags every worthy story to everybody. You know, they paint them in history immediately to be spread, embellished, exaggerated. Like, we've got a god who literally sits there going, yeah, tell me more, give me more story, here's more mana, keep telling me stories, bitch, come on, let's go. Like, that's one of the stories in the narrative of the story articles is literally Tybalt telling us the ongoing saga that is in the set. Like, he's telling it's not even finished yet. This is my ongoing saga, let me tell you it. And it's already a saga as a card. Like, that speaks so much in terms of like context of what we've seen from sagas before, in terms of how the plane kind of presents itself by having so many stories. Is it too many? Probably, but is that what Kaldheim's about? Absolutely. So it probably, as much as it can be slightly overwhelming when you see them as a block of pictures in front of you, as I have this morning, and going, fucking hell, that's a lot of sagas, that's a lot of abilities, I can't remember any of this. It's because there's a lot of stories to tell in Kaldheim. Every story is worth telling in Kaldheim. That is very representative, and I think it plays off this, how do you pull off sagas that are kind of happening right now? How do you pull off sagas about history that only happened maybe last week or a year ago? You know, because we're not necessarily we don't get the saga that's like the creation of the 10 realms, you know, or the Great Doomscar. No one cares about the things that happened like years and years ago. No, it's what happened like last week. What's going on right now?
Yeah, for the most part, they're all very immediate. They're all like, yeah, it's the way of telling the news, right?
Yeah, fantastic analogy. Yeah, I love that. It's almost like, yeah, what's the Daily Saga? You know, fantastic little columns. Oh, it's little columns. Oh man, it all comes together. Oh man,
we got that
top-down design. So yeah, so the problem I find that with this is that I think a lot of these events are kind of hard to immediately remember because they don't have specific relevance, and there are 20 of them. I think this might be where they can fall down slightly. Again, like there's not necessarily like, if you didn't know about the Phyrexian scripts or didn't know about the Antiquities War, there isn't a whole article that you can go and research about these. Some of these things haven't even occurred within the story, and they might not have any context whatsoever. So things like the Bears of Lityara, I'm like, cool, I want to know more. Guess tough tits.
Yeah.
because there isn't anymore, because we haven't got any more of that story. And I mean, and that's maybe unfair, because obviously, as I said, it's very difficult to how do you fix that problem? I don't think you can, because again, we haven't got the histories of Kaldheim. We haven't got context from thousands of years ago. All we've got is the now and the here and now. So this is probably a better way of storytelling each individual realm, by giving us little histories and individual histories from each individual realm. And I think that's what kind of pushes this over the edge in terms back into a really positive thing for the set, because even though it is quite a lot to get your head around, this is the only way they can give each individual realm its own kind of history book. You get 2 sagas per realm, which I think is probably just about enough to try and tell enough stories to give them their individuality and kind of give you a bit of history if you wanted to. I think,
marry that up along with all the general cards from those realms that all individually do quite a lot of work to tell the stories of these like tribes and everything like that. Just the general feel and flavor of the individual creature cards, even.
And I think this is kind of where they hit the nail on the head in terms of mechanic diversity, because I think mechanically these are much more deliberate and refined in telling a story that compared to, say, Dominaria. Again, I'm going to use the example of make a dude, your dudes get bigger. With, say, for example, the Bears of the Era, you make a dude, then that dude gains power. I mean, I guess it's kind of like the first row in games of, yes, okay, mechanically it shows a progression of your dude getting bigger and then fighting things, but it kind of still tells more of a story than, hey, soldiers, more soldiers get bigger. I think that specific refinement is very important for sagas that don't have story relevance in our mind already. We don't know anything about, say, the Binding of the Old Gods or the Battle of Frost and Fire. So you need to tell me it. You need to tell me all of the information. So you need to try and get as much you can on there. Notably, none of the sagas go for 4 chapters. Only a few of them did in Theros Beyond Death anyway. I don't think it's necessarily overcomplicated Theros Beyond Death sagas. I think it would have been a mistake to do them in these, because there's already a lot going on in them. I'm just scrolling down through all of them, make sure I'm not wrong in that regard. No, they're all 3 chapters. Yeah, cool. Because I think, they're trying to tell more of a story because they need to. There's less context, so they need to put all of the context on the card. Again, that makes it a bit of an inundation of information. But once you break it down and start to look at the nuance of each card, I think that works. I think it's nice to then pull the history apart because we don't know it. It's not automatically relevant going, oh yeah, I know that already. It's like, no, I don't know it. Let me learn. Let me sit down and have a little look and listen.
Yeah, for sure.
So then the other thing that's kind of interesting is their diversity has continued in terms of the way they present the artwork of the sagas. I'm not entirely sure what Waking the Trolls is supposed to be. All I know is it's very different from all of the other ones, and I like it. But you've got things like tattoos, horn carvings, you've got medals, embossed armor. There's an actual sculpted bit of wood. And when I say, like, oh, okay, an actual bit of sculpted wood, yeah, they've done this before. No. The person hasn't painted a picture. The Binding of the Old Gods is an actual goddamn sculpture, like a wood carving that Victor Adamo Minguez has done, and then just taken a picture of and added into and and it's not the first time this has been done. If you look back at old cards, Claws of Gix, Worn Power Stone, and Cathodian are all actual real-world sculptures that have been taken a picture of and then kind of stylized to make it look like it's a painting. Go and have a look at them, by the way. It kind of puts the artwork in a whole new context. But it's the first time this has been done in a long time, and it's something I would love them to do in future. Like, looking back at, say, the First of Crow and War, I would have loved them to have actually done it, to get someone to do an actual tapestry and half finish it. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing more of this if we could. Obviously, that's something that the art, like the creators, directors are going to have to look at. It's not something that I can really like go, yeah, no, can we get more of this, please? I know it's really easy. It's really easy.
Well, I know that Victor Adamo Minguez, as an artist, is someone who experiments a lot with sculpture. So I think it was just kind of a nice marriage up of, they went, oh, can you do the saga? And he went, yeah, sure. Can I sculpt it? Like, I can imagine that is pretty much how the conversation went, because he is an artist who also has been dipping his toes into the world of sculpture over the past few years. So pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool. So moving on to favourite picks from the set, because I figure there's probably a lot to talk about the cards specifically. As I say, the main thing to take apart, I think, for sagas for these is that they do have much more nuance to them. There's very few of them that double up the same ability twice. They all have individual things that you can kind of pick apart, and there's a lot more story to tell within them. So what were your highlights from Kaldheim?
Sure. So one of them was Forging of the Tyrite Sword.
Oh, very good.
Which is 1 red white. First 2 chapters are create a treasure token, and then the third chapter is search your library for a card named Halvar, God of Battle, or an equipment card. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. And the artwork shows the Tyrite sword being forged, as the name suggests. It's a bit more abstract. It's not like a literal sort of like forging of the sword depicted in. It's got at the bottom. It's got, can't quite describe what it is. It's kind of like a a sculpture made out of gold and tyrite, which is kind of the aurora tree sap substance, because it is the tyrite sword. So at the bottom, you've got depictions of Cole, the Forge Master, who's the red-white dwarf legendary. That is the Forge Master who made the tyrite sword. You've also then got a bust of Halvar, who is the god of battle, who the sword, also known as the Sword of the Realms, was originally designed for. And then you have the tyrite sword with a kind of snaking depiction of the serpent which is, I can't remember what's Coma the world serpent. That's it. Who is also a cosmic monster who are made and kind of interact with tyrite as well.
Such a cool title. Cosmic monster.
Yeah, very cool. So it's not the most super literal depicting of how this thing was made or why this thing was made, but the thing which I really like is the third ability: search your library for a card named Halvar, God of Battle, or an equipment card and reveal it. Put it into your hand, shuffle your library. This looking for a specific card that has story relevance to the saga is kind of new, and it's something that we've seen in the Planeswalker deck products, where there were specific Planeswalkers made for, like, they were almost like intro packs, they're intro decks, that's what they kind of replaced. And they had cards in those, and still do, which referenced the kind of face Planeswalker card to be like, oh, you have this thing, go get it. Like, Teferi's daughter character was originally given a card in his Planeswalker deck from Dominaria, and when she entered the battlefield, you went and looked for that specific Teferi to kind of like to fetch out of your deck so you get to play it, but there was also kind of a bit of story relevance as well. So to bring that mechanic from those Planeswalker decks, which aren't very well received, but to bring them into the main standard legal sets, as well as then having the caveat of going, oh, but you can also find equipment and do this other thing, because that's the kind of flavor of the card as well. I think it's just really neat. Like, it's really specific whilst also not just pigeonholing you, because they've given it these other abilities as well. So you can play your Forging of the Tyrite Sword. You can get your God, Halvar, God of Battle card into your hand, and then you can either play him as Halvar, or you can play him as the Sword of the Realms, because he's a modal double-face card. So you forge the sword, then you get to play the sword. I mean, come on. That's it's just really good. It's just really cool. So I for that ability alone, and the fact that Kieran Yanna's artwork for this, with the Aurora, I mean, all of the artists who have got this Aurora effect, this Tyrite effect on their cards, it looks insane. But yeah, Kieran Yanna, to have a top to bottom card artwork of this sword being made, really cool. Love it.
That's going to look really good in foil. It reminds me a lot of the masterpieces from, the inventions from Kaladesh. They had, a lot of them had the gold filigree kind of pattern. I think that's a really nice, striking art style. I'm glad, we saw it again here. It also kind of shows that maybe even Cole himself, made this, because I know he's like a master forger. Like, maybe he's the only one who could have had because I think they talk about this a lot, and don't they, in Kaldheim, about how the making of your weapon is your your creative expression, isn't it? It's your way of telling kind of your story, and you can only name it once you've had a feat that's worthy to name it with.
Yeah, the dwarves from Axgard, that's like their life's ambition, is to create the perfect weapon. And they might create others, but their first one has to be like this mythical weapon.
He's got to be so pissed that Tybalt stole it, right? He's going to be so angry. It's like,
I think he kills him.
That's a good point. Let me check one of the other sagas that says what happens in the story. He's definitely got a sword through him. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, cool.
Yep.
Oh, poor Cole. The last thing he had was his grand creation being taken away from him. God damn it, dwarves never get no love. I also want to point out quickly that you get a little banner on the left-hand side behind the chapter numbers, signifying the colours of the cards. So obviously these are all multicoloured, so they're all the two coloured based on whichever realm they're from. And I like the little banner a lot. I think it does. Obviously, it helps kind of show what the colours were, but it's also a little hint of extra colour you wouldn't have necessarily seen. I always like this when they do gold cards, of where you're like, what are they going to do with the gold card, with the new framing for like the legends, for example. Like, it's always interesting to see them do a new thing when it comes to framing, as well as it comes to doing the artwork. So my first flavour pick has a kind of a similar idea. I mean, again, a lot of these sagas are kind of showing events that are kind of happening within the set, or maybe happened just beforehand. My first one is Harold Unites the Elves. This is 2 black, a green, and the first chapter, you mill 3 cards, then may put an elf or Tyver card from your graveyard onto the battlefield. Second chapter, put a +1/+1 counter on each elf you control. Third chapter, whenever an elf you control attacks this turn, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So again, we see this thing of where you're not only getting an elf from your graveyard, but it's also allowing you to get Tyvar, who's an elf planeswalker. Obviously, they can't put creature types onto planeswalkers. In the same fashion, again with Forging the Tyrite Sword, it's quite nice that you can get the characters that are relevant as well as just any generic elf, because that makes sense for the mechanic of the card. But the thing I really like about this is that the artwork shows a medal almost, like a medallion of Herald uniting the elves together. And yes, okay, the mechanics do show this idea of putting. I like this idea of with mill 3 cards is putting aside your differences, which is a little bit, maybe that's a little bit abstract. But then bringing back an elf from your graveyard or Tyvar, putting a +1/+1 counter on all your elves, making them stronger, and then leading them into battle. And because you're united, it makes your opponents weaker. This is fantastic. Kind of demonstrates the way that he was able to unite the two different sides, the Wood Elves and the Shadow Elves, together. If you didn't already know that was kind of a thing, and also. The thing I like about the artwork is that it kind of does the medallion itself isn't aspect ratio appropriate. It doesn't stretch all the way to the top or to the bottom. You kind of lose a little bit to the left and right of the medal. But what I like about it is that it's almost as if someone had to set, like, this thing that he did. It's not just worthy of the story of it. No, we need to go and make a medallion of this moment that he did, because it's such a prestigious event, and it was like a very big event for the elves to have them be united, because there was this fracturing of them that happens ever since the Scoti kind of overtook their pantheon and banish them to their own realm. And they kind of then sit. It's weird because it flips over the general trope of the elves being mightier than thou. Like, it feels like in this set it's quite nice to see the elves are kind of the underdogs in comparison, and this thing of this ability to kind of unify them together. Because even in things like Lord of the Rings, like the Wood Elves and the High Elves and things, they don't all like get along like happy Larry. There's usually dysfunction between the different clans of elves in most fantasy walks of life, which is really strange to have that in most fantasy archetypes. They're always defined specifically by being the smarter ones, or the more mischievous ones, or the ones that were into nature. And they do this again in Kaldheim. They had this big split, but again, this big event, being able to marry the two together, I think is really good. It also gives Harold, who is just an uncommon legend, it gives him a bit more story relevance and him a bit more aplomb as well, because we might not necessarily get to see a proper story of Harold and how he's a relevant, interesting character. Again, there's a lot of legends in Kaldheim. There's not enough time for all of them. But again, it gives him a bit more of a backstory. And this is the thing that's interesting. Having 10 different realms, all having their own legends, all having their own histories, is probably one of the only ways you can, handhold people through their history and give them a bit of background information on it. So, it's really good to see.
Yeah, for sure. My next flavor pick is King Narfi's Betrayal, which is 1 blue-black for a enchantment saga. Chapter 1, each player mills 4 cards, then you may exile a creature or planeswalker card from each graveyard. And then chapters 2 and 3 are until end of turn, you may cast spells from among the cards exiled with King Narfi's Betrayal, and you may spend mana as though it was any mana color to cast it. And the artwork by Chase Stone is this story of the King Narfi, who is the king of the Draga. And his story is something that we've touched on quite a bit in other episodes, where he made a deal with the god of death to basically zombify all of his people on his realm. And so he can kind of like live endlessly as this zombified king with all of his minions. And this is depicted in ceremonial armor, which is being worn presumably by Narfi, or it could be another Draga that just has quite fancy armor on. But it's the etching on this ceremonial armor in the breastplate, where we can see this kind of deal being struck. And yeah, it's very cool. It's a really nice depiction of zombies. Like, again, a bit like the way I like Therosian zombies are kind of depicted, not necessarily as mindless. That's kind of carried on in Kaldheim as well, with the idea that the Draga aren't these undead just there to eat brains or being risen by some necromancer. They are their own sort of race with their own agency. It's just that they're obviously warped and twisted and sent to the depths of madness because they are the living undead, essentially. And I just really like this idea that how we said with King Narfi, one of the big sort of like FUs in King Narfi's thing is that he didn't ask. It wasn't like he made a deal with his people to do this. It's all very self-centered. And the fact that he zombified his entire like realm because he wanted to retain power in an essence is very telling.
It's
And
very
that
King
this
Brago,
saga,
isn't it?
yeah, very King Brago. And this is the story on the saga, you know, the fact that you, without asking, you simply take from other people's decks, or like you force players to mill cards and then you take from their deck whatever you want, you know, without their permission, and then you resurrect them as part of your own sort of like kingdom, so you zombify them essentially. It also speaks to the way that the Draga in Kaldheim are these kind of like treasure crazed and like gold hungry marauders. So one of the things that they really like doing is they like going to other realms when they can and plundering for gold and treasure, because that's a big part of their whole kind of power trip, is that they wanted to hang on to their wealth and their riches. So this idea of plundering other people's decks not only is a very Demir thing, it's also a very Kaldheim zombie thing. And yeah, I just think just the whole card, and it's kind of a saga that I think you could miss because it's not a very splashy story beat, and it is something that did happen a while ago in the kind of grand scheme of Kaldheim. It's not something that's like an ongoing plot thread. But yeah, I really like it. I think it's just it's really nuanced and kind of cool looking saga, I think. So yeah, I really like it.
I like the idea that if this isn't him himself and this is what he embossed onto all of his, like, you know, Legion's armor, it's like, from his point of view, it's like, look what I've done for you, you know, look what I did for you. Whereas for all the people that are wearing it, it's like, it's a reminder of their subservience, you know, a daily reminder of that this is the, you know, the curse that you're under. I think that's quite, very cool. I like this idea of wearing history, like it's like heart in your sleeve kind of thing, isn't it? You're wearing your history on your person as you walk around and kind of like, look, this is what has happened. We're living it now, but this is the history that we've been through. Yeah, very cool. My last one is kind of a little more shallow, I suppose, in terms of the reason why I like it. And it's the 3 seasons. It's blue-green. Chapter 1, mill 3 cards. Chapter 2, return up to 2 target snow permanents from your graveyard to your hand. Chapter 3, choose 3 cards in each graveyard. Their owners shuffle those cards into their libraries. Okay, not particularly slash effects. Kind of similar to the Mending of Dominaria in terms of its functionality. The reason I like this is twofold. One, I love progression of seasons. I don't know why, there's something about it that makes me really happy. This idea of showing the passage of time, this idea of milling 3 cards is almost like the leaves falling from the trees. They're returning 2 target snow permanents through graveyard to your hand is like the snow coming in, you know, like the winter effect, as they call it in Kaldheim, blood sky. And then the last thing is choosing the 3 in your graveyard and then recycling them back into your deck, like this rebirth aspect as we go into spring. Like, I think that's amazing. In terms of artwork, this is to me, this is unbelievable. This isn't actually like a picture of a sculpture, because it's the Anna Paquette has done an amazing job here of basically, it's a stonework effect, but the way that it's kind of half sun dappled, so it's almost like there's a shade kind of presenting on it, and this is deliberate, as I'm going to talk about in a second, but everything about it makes me feel like it's a real world bit of sculpture. And having seen the woodwork that Victor Minguez did, it made me think of this in the same fashion, and even though I found out afterwards it wasn't, I still now hold it in higher regard in my head because of it. But what I like is it has the same effect that the Phyrexian Scriptures artwork has, is as you go down the artwork, the first chapter is sunlit, the second chapter is in shade, and then the third chapter, this red hue is sneaking up through. And the reason why it's called Blood Sky in Kaldheim is because Varagoth led an assault against the humans, and they've forever known winter to be known as Blood Sky as remembrance of that great massacre, like the Blood Sky massacre. He basically kind of destroyed like 80% of their realm before he was stopped. And I love this idea, this ominous effect. If it starts at the top feeling quite nice and quite optimistic, and by the time you get to the bottom, it's a reminder of, you know, the death that came from winter. And again, as you look down the chapters, the artwork gets darker and then more bloody as you're reading down. So it's, as you're reading, you're getting this subconscious feeling of dread coming up. And for a 2-mana like regrow effect for snow permanents, I mean, again, as I say, I don't think I'm probably not going to play it, but the fact that the mechanics of the card kind of present the seasonal effect, and then the artwork kind of explains the seasonal effect of the people of Kaldheim. I think that's really nice synergy between the two.
Yeah, very, very cool. I think, sagas are just great, aren't they? I think that's just, we can just cut the whole episode, edit the whole episode, and just be like, sagas are great. They're just so cool.
Right? Yeah. So the last thing I had at the bottom is, well, what now? Okay, like we've talked about sagas at length for an hour, saying, "Oh, they're great, they're so cool, they're amazing." But what now? I mean, how are we going to use these going forwards? I mean, because I think you put a poll up, didn't you, of saying, would you like to see them be in every set going forwards? And my initial response was no. And that wasn't to be like, oh, I don't like sagas, I don't think we should see them in sets. It was more a matter of having seen how they've been delivered so far, I think that they would struggle to make them as relevant and as well articulated if they were forced in their mind to have to make them every set for every story arc, and each time you go to a place like, okay, what are the important stories we want to tell? Like, this feels like they really went out of their way to make these all fit mechanically. They're interesting, they fit into the set, they're very artistically imaginative, and they're all of the boxes ticked from sagas that they normally are, with very little downside, which is impressive that they've managed to revisit this mechanic 3 times, and each time it's taken leaps and bounds. I think the way that I would like to see sagas going forwards is that a lot of these sagas within Kaldheim, and weirdly enough, Kaldheim being the story set, has actually a lot of story spotlights. I think it's 13 story spotlight cards, which is quite a lot. I mean, especially since you don't get them in the right order necessarily. I think you get Doomscar very early in terms of, like, if you're looking at the set going through white, blue, black, red, green, they're multicolored cards. Whereas I think probably Doomscar in the actual story won't probably happen until the end of the narrative story, which is confusing in its own regard. But I would be very interested in seeing the story spotlight cards, instead of being specific actions that we see within the set, to be these sagas, to be like, right, cool, this is the story we need to tell from the set. If you didn't read any of the narrative of the web fiction or whatever, this is the story of the set on a card, and let's show it in chapters. Like things like really good example is the Trickster God's Heist is an active story from this set, and it's one of the story spotlight cards, and it shows the moment that Tybalt steals the Tyrate sword from Cole, kills him, and then takes it for his own. Those are the kind of things that you might miss if you weren't keeping up to date with the story normally, but when you play with the cards, you're like, oh, so who's the Trickster God? I guess he did this, and it's all explained quite simply with the mechanics and everything. So I think that would be a good way going forwards, if they do want to do sagas in every set, to kind of make them feel organic, is to be telling the story of the set in the card format that tells stories. Like, you've already set a precedence of this is the way you like telling stories, and it works really well. And from our point of view, obviously, we're subjective, but we think it's a home run. Maybe this is the way you should be presenting the stories in your cards going forwards.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely a whole conversation to be had about where the accessibility lies on telling stories on the cardboard for people who maybe don't necessarily read the stories for one reason or another. Because obviously, myriad of reasons why people don't read the web fiction, not least because sometimes there just isn't any. But I know there's a very prominent content creator called Magic Arcanum, and on their Twitter, they were saying how they feel that you should be able to know exactly what the storyline is just from reading the cards. Which is obviously very tricky and something which I don't think we'll ever quite get to. It's something I agree with in principle. So I wonder, maybe the sagas are the place to do it. Maybe the sagas are a bit too abstract for that. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that's a big conversation, maybe for another time.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed us talking very much at length. This has ran a lot longer than we intended to, but I think that's just because there's so much to talk about the sagas and so much that we didn't even talk about now. But yeah, I think still rings true, even talking about them for about an hour and a half from what I said at the top of the episode. I think these may be my favourite card type, at least until they
do another one.
do another one, or like maybe like change the direction with Planeswalkers, which I don't think they ever will do. But yeah, cool. I'll provide links in the description below, guys, from the articles that I know Jay Annelli has done. I don't think he's released a Kaldheim one yet. I'll have to research. I didn't see it.
I imagine he's got a lot of time to do things. It's a lot of sagas to get through.
So I will put the ones in for Dominaria and for Theros, which I know he did break down as well. If you want to hit us up on Twitter, guys, and talk to us about sagas or basically anything, really, you can hit us up on Twitter at mtflavouring. Our personal Twitters are at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Emails go to mtflavouring@gmail.com. Nathan, any last words on the episode?
No, it was nice to have a nice waffly episode. You came for the content. I hope you stayed for the waffles.
Yeah, for sure. We obviously will be doing an episode on the Kaldheim story when the story wraps up. I need to catch up on a couple of episodes, but I know that there's a couple of newer writers that we like from Zendikar that have come back to do a story or two on the side stories, so we'll have to check those out. But yeah, until next time, guys, all that's left for me to say, if I can get it out of my mouth, is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.